Okay, so you know how you sent over that global geopolitics PDF?
Uh-huh.
We're going to try to break it down and pull out the big takeaways for you.
Okay.
You know, think of this as your super quick cheat sheet to what the world might look like in 2025.
Sounds good.
All right, so right off the bat, this document is saying that 2025 is not just another year.
Yeah.
It's like a huge turning point.
Right.
Think those moments in history where everything kind of went sideways.
Uh-huh.
You've got this weird mix of Cold War vibes, 20th century power struggles, and then all these new economic battles that feel very 21st century.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot to unpack.
It really is. So, one of the first things that jumps out is this shift away from the U.S. being the only big dog on the block.
Right. And the document really signals the end of that post-Cold War period where the U.S. was like the sole superpower.
Yeah, they're having to deal with their own stuff at home and figure out how to play in a world where other countries are getting more powerful.
Exactly. It's like
Okay.
a big adjustment for them.
So, so who are these other players? Who's stepping up to the plate?
Well, the document points to China as a major player. They call them a formidable rival. And they've made some serious advancements in their economy and their military, both.
So it's not as simple as just the US versus the Soviet Union like back in the day.
No, not at all. It's a much more complex landscape now.
Yeah.
It's what they call a multipolar world. So
Okay.
instead of just two superpowers calling all the shots, you have multiple power centers.
So a bunch of different countries leading different regions.
Right. Regional leaders, new alliances. It's kind of like a big game of Risk, but in real life.
Okay, so speaking of regions, what's going on in Europe? They always seem to have something going on.
Well, the document says that the European Union is facing some internal struggles. There are economic differences between countries, and there are also some political shifts happening that are making things kind of shaky.
What kind of political shift?
Well, for example, the UK is getting closer to the US. And at the same time, a lot of the Eastern European countries are getting increasingly wary of Russia. So you've got these different forces pulling the EU in different directions.
And then there's India. The document calls them a balancing force, which seems kind of interesting. What's that all about?
Yeah, that's a good point. India's in a unique position. They've got good relationships with the US, China, and Russia, and they're trying to kind of play all sides without fully committing to one or the other.
So they're like the Switzerland of Asia.
Kinda, yeah. They're trying to maintain their independence and leverage their relationships to get the best deals for themselves.
Smart. Now, this is kind of surprising, but the document talks about how the Middle East, especially the Gulf nations, are becoming less reliant on oil. How are they doing that?
Well, it seems like they're investing a lot in artificial intelligence and renewable energy.
Really?
Yeah, a pretty savvy move. They're basically trying to future-proof their economies and maintain their global influence even as the world starts to move away from fossil fuels.
So they're not just sitting on their oil wells, they're actually thinking ahead.
Exactly. They're diversifying their economies and positioning themselves as leaders in new technologies.
Okay, so we've talked about the US, China, Europe, India, the Middle East. What about Russia? What's their deal in 2025?
Well, the document says that Russia, under Putin's successor, is trying to kind of flex its muscles and reassert itself as a major power.
So they're trying to bring back the Soviet Union.
In a way, yeah, they're trying to reclaim their sphere of influence, especially in Eastern Europe. The document even compares their actions to those of the Soviet Union during the Cold War.
But didn't all those Western sanctions after they invaded Ukraine kind of cripple their economy?
Yeah, they did. But the sanctions actually pushed Russia to build stronger ties with other countries that were also kind of at odds with the West. So they've got new alliances now with China, Iran, and even some countries in Africa.
So they're not as isolated as some people might think.
No, not at all. They've actually found new partners and are finding ways to work around the sanctions.
Interesting. And the document also mentions that Russia is making some big moves up in the Arctic. Why is that so important?
Well, the Arctic is becoming increasingly important for a couple of reasons. First, it's got a lot of natural resources that are becoming more accessible as the ice melts. And second, it's a strategically important region for military positioning. So Russia is up there building bases and trying to assert their dominance.
So it's like a new Cold War, but in the Arctic?
Kinda, yeah. It's definitely a region to watch.
And how is all this affecting NATO? They must be pretty concerned about Russia's actions.
Definitely. The document says that NATO is expanding in response to the perceived threat from Russia. But there are also some internal challenges within NATO that are making it harder for them to present a united front.
Like what? What kind of challenges?
Well, different NATO members have different ideas about how serious the threat from Russia really is. And there are also some ongoing debates about how much each country should be contributing to NATO's defense. So it's not a totally cohesive alliance.
So even though they're expanding, they're not as strong as they could be.
Exactly. They're facing some internal divisions that could weaken their response to a potential crisis.
And it's not just about troops and tanks anymore, right? The document talks about this new kind of tension between Russia and the West, like a digital version of the Cuban Missile Crisis. What's that all about?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. The document talks about how the threat of cyber warfare is adding a whole new dimension to the geopolitical landscape. It's
Yeah.
like a new kind of arms race. But instead of nukes, it's all about hacking, misinformation, and disrupting critical infrastructure.
So it's like the Cold War, but online.
Exactly. And it's potentially even more dangerous because the lines are so blurred. It's hard to know who's behind a cyber attack, and the potential for escalation is huge.
That's scary stuff.
Hmm.
So it's not just about military strength anymore. It's also about who's got the best hackers and the most sophisticated AI.
Right. Technology is becoming the new battleground. And it's not just about cyber warfare either. The document also talks about the competition between the US and China in areas like quantum computing and artificial intelligence.
Yeah, that quantum computing stuff sounds especially wild. What is that? Like computers that can do magic?
Well, not magic exactly, but they can perform calculations that are basically impossible for current computers. It's a really complex field, but the basic idea is that quantum computers can solve certain types of problems much faster than traditional computers. And that has huge implications for everything from code breaking to material science to drug discovery.
So whoever controls quantum computing basically controls the future.
It's a bit of an oversimplification, but it's definitely a game changer. And the US and China are both pouring massive resources into developing this technology.
And then there's the whole AI thing. The document mentions how AI-driven misinformation campaigns are becoming a huge problem. Like, how can you even tell what's real anymore when you can just fake anything with AI?
That's a really important point. The rise of deepfakes and other AI-powered misinformation tools is making it harder and harder to distinguish between truth and falsehood. And that has the potential to erode trust in institutions, sow discord, and even influence elections.
Yeah, it's like we're living in a post-truth world.
In a way, yeah,
Yeah.
the very notion of objective reality is being challenged.
Yeah.
And that's a really dangerous situation.
And it's not just governments doing this, right? The document also talks about these hacktivist groups that are like digital Robin Hoods or something. Who are these guys?
Well, hacktivists are basically individuals or groups that use hacking skills to promote a political or social cause. They might target corporations, governments, or even individuals that they see as enemies of their cause.
So they're like digital vigilantes.
In a way, yeah. They often operate outside the law, but they see themselves as fighting for justice. And they can be a really powerful force, especially in the online world.
And then there's the whole space thing. The document talks about how space is becoming militarized. I mean, I knew that was happening to some extent, but it seems like it's getting pretty serious.
Yeah, the document points to the development of anti-satellite weapons by both the US and China as a major concern. It basically means that space, which was once considered a peaceful domain, is now becoming another potential battleground.
So it's like Star Wars is becoming a reality.
Well, maybe not with lightsabers and the Force and all that, but the idea of space as a potential theater of war is definitely becoming more realistic.
And what about the global economy? The document hints at a potential restructuring, maybe even something as big as the Bretton Woods Agreement after World War II. What's driving this shift?
Well, a few things. First, there's the rise of China and their Belt and Road Initiative, which is creating a new network of trade and investment that's challenging the existing global order. Second, there's the emergence of digital currencies, especially the digital yuan and AI-backed cryptocurrencies, which are potentially undermining the dominance of the US dollar. And third, there's a growing sense that the current global economic system is just not working for a lot of people. It's too unequal, too unstable, and too prone to crises.
So basically, everything is up in the air.
Pretty much. The document paints a picture of a world in flux, with old certainties breaking down and new ones yet to be established.
And what about the big question? War or peace? Does the document give any clues about which way things might go?
Well, it doesn't give a definitive answer, but it does lay out the stakes pretty clearly. It talks about the ghosts of history, the League of Nations, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the War on Terror, as reminders of how easily things can go wrong. And it points to the current situation with all the technological advancements, economic shifts, and ideological tensions as a potentially very dangerous mix.
So it's like we're standing at a crossroads.
Exactly. And the choices we make in the next few years could determine the course of history for decades to come.
So to sum up this deep dive into globalgeopolitics.pdf, it seems like the world in 2025 is going to be a pretty wild place. We've got a multipolar world, new technologies that are changing the nature of conflict, a global economy in transition, and a whole lot of uncertainty about the future.
And that's just what we know now. Imagine what new challenges and opportunities might emerge as AI continues to evolve at this breakneck speed. It's both exciting and a little bit terrifying, to be honest.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, thanks for breaking all this down for us. I think I'm going to need a nap after all that.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's a lot to take in, but it's important stuff to think about. The future is in our hands, and it's up to us to shape it.
Well said. All right, that's it for this deep dive. Thanks for tuning in, and be sure to check back for our next episode. Who knows what we'll be exploring next?
Until next time.